So welcome, Dr. Galland. As I mentioned off air, it is a pleasure to have you here, and to have the opportunity to speak with you and interview you, because I did read your book, and I came across your book, The Allergies Solution, as I mentioned, out of desperation. But what I didn't mention was I was trying to battle my own little issues of skin problems and allergies that I've developed in my I would say mid-20s. And I found myself struggling for a few weeks this spring, and trying my methods of tackling it, as I've done in the past. And I was seeing results and I was getting better. And then I woke up on a Saturday morning, and I felt like I'd taken 4 steps forward in my healing journey and 50 steps backwards, which led me to finally pick up your book, which I had, sitting with amongst other books that I purchased and haven't started reading yet. And I literally spent an entire Saturday, which I never do. I do read almost every day, and I spend about 45 minutes reading. But I spent, I don't know, about 6 hours reading. And I got through the book, and I got my fiance to start making me sweet potatoes, lentils, beans, pretty much every single day. And and again, it's only been now about a month or so that I've been doing this, and I'm an addict now of oolong tea, which I enjoy. So thank you for being here. I want to unpackage the whole allergy thing, because it's something that is dear to my heart, because I'm suffering from it. And the more and more I unpackage it for myself and tell people about it and talk to people about it, I start realizing that, okay, like, so many people around me face similar things. So I want to start by asking you, why is it that you went down, the route of understanding allergies and how to tackle them?
Well, I do have had allergies myself, but I don't think that was really the main driver. It was that I've been seeing for decades. I've kind of specialized in seeing patients who have complex chronic problems that are not getting the solutions that they need. And so I realized that many of these patients had allergies and hypersensitivities. And the way that I approach problems like this is I research them. That is, I'm a clinician, but I'm a scientist at heart. So if I'm dealing with a problem, I want to really understand that problem and get to the root of it, and not just try to figure out, okay, we can slap this treatment on it. So I started doing deep dives with allergy, and what I discovered, and that led to my creating the allergy solution, writing it with my son Jonathan, and a lot of this information is in there. But basically, we're dealing with, there's an epidemic of allergies, and that there actually been different waves of the epidemic. This started in the late 19th, early 20th century. Another wave occurred in the kind of middle of the mid to late 20th century. And there was a third wave that kind of started towards the end of the 20th century into this century. And I actually think we're seeing a fourth wave now as a result of the pandemic. So the first wave was basically
as a result of the COVID pandemic.
The COVID pandemic, yes. So the first wave involved things like hay fever and the sort of more ordinary environmental airborne allergens. Before 1860 or so, there was no concept of hay fever anywhere. And the term originally was called seasonal catarrh. Catarrh being colds, and this was something that would happen in season. And it became very clear that this happened in urban and industrial areas, not in rural areas. And so this was the first wave. It was the result of industrial pollution. And the effects of industrial pollution were to alter two things. One is the respiratory lining of people living exposed to a polluted environment. And the other was a change in the pollination patterns of plants. Because when plants are threatened, they make more pollen. I mean, it's a way of saving the species.
Yeah.
So that was the first set of events that went on. And it kind of became recognized in the early part of the 20th century. This is what we're dealing with. Now, the next part of the epidemic kind of starts around 1950, 1960. We see asthma and eczema really emerging. And a major factor there, as opposed to outdoor air pollution, was indoor air pollution. And the presence of formaldehyde within buildings, strongly associated with it. More time spent indoors, watching television. But the television is not the cause, probably not the cause. I have to take that back because there may be something about the TV screens and the electromagnetic fields. I'll get to that in a moment.
Please, because there's also something we hear about, in terms of headphones that we use, computer screens, etc.
Right. That's another. So that really, that's when this really dramatic increase globally in asthma in particular, but eczema as well, started. And there were two other aspects outside of indoor air pollution that were changing. Automotive pollution plays a major role. In the early part of the 20th century, the major type of air pollution was particulate matter, industrial pollution. Since the 1950s, the major type that most of us in industrialized countries are running into is automotive pollution. And two really interesting studies related to that. There was a researcher in Baltimore who took seeds of ragweed pollen and put them in pots. They were an identical batch. I mean, it was one batch of ragweed seeds, seeds of ragweed planted in the same soil in pots. And he put some of the pots in the inner city of Baltimore, some out in the suburbs, and some way out in rural Maryland, in the country. The inner city ragweed grew to be 3 times as large as the rural ragweed, and it produced 100 times more pollen. So there's that influence on the plant. In addition, and then there was a study that was done in Germany before, I guess in the 1980s, before the Berlin Wall came down, comparing grass pollen in East Germany and grass pollen in West Germany. And the main type of pollution in East Germany was industrial pollution. Whereas in West Germany, the main pollution, airborne pollution, was automotive pollution. And the pollen grains in West Germany were way more allergenic than the pollen grains in East Germany. That's the same country, basically, with the same kinds of grass. So that's the effect of different types of pollution on, on allergenicity. The third wave of this pandemic, or the third of the allergy pandemic, that is food allergy. And between the early 1990s, over a period of 20 years, the incidence in the US of food allergy tripled. And I'm talking about real, very definite food allergy, not some kind of vague food intolerance, which is real. But I'm talking about anaphylactic reactions to nuts, for example. And the conclusions about that are that that is due to changes in the microbes in the gut microbiome, as a result of the widespread use of not only antibiotics, but antiseptic products. Just, I mean, like gym clothes are impregnated with antimicrobials so that they don't smell so bad. I mean, it's now the next. Okay, so
so we're doing it like we're taking a lot of actions on a daily basis.
Yeah,
in our society to kill good bacteria.
Right. Plus animals, I mean, farm animals are being treated with antibiotics. So you're getting the antibiotics if you're consuming them. So there's this widespread exposure to antimicrobials that's altering the gut microbiome, and maybe the respiratory microbiome as well, and the skin microbiome.
Also, I was just going to ask, like, you mentioned the 4 waves of this, and you mentioned Germany, but do these waves, do we see them come up in specific countries and specific places in the world, or is it widespread?
Oh, it's very widespread now. I mean, but it is still the case that in places where there are people who are relatively separated from what we call civilization, that there's a very low incidence of allergic problems. And now I would say that there are 3 additional factors that are contributing to what I'll call the 4th wave. Electromagnetic pollution. The cells that create the allergic response in the body, that kind of carry the payload at the end of the cascade that actually create symptoms, are called mast cells. They are large cells that are scattered throughout the tissues. They don't really circulate in blood. But they're the ones that respond to the allergic antibodies. They're very sensitive to the influence of electromagnetic fields. And there was this fascinating study done in Sweden at the Karolinska Institute. That's the place that hands out the Nobel Prize. So it's not a lightweight institution, where they did skin biopsies. They sat people in front of the TV screen for 2 hours, and they did skin biopsies. And what they found was, for about 25% of the people, the mast cells in their skin migrated towards the screen. That is, they moved, and many of those mast cells release the chemicals that are stored in their granules, whether or not the people had symptoms. So we're seeing this concept of mast cell activation disorder is getting a lot of traction among people with chronic illness, who are not chronic unexplained illness. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing it, certainly part of it is that there's a greater awareness of it, but I think there's an absolute increase in it because of all the EMF pollution that we're exposed to on a daily basis.
Are there ways for us to try and restrict ourselves from this pollution? Because I think to myself that, yes, maybe even, from my understanding, even using like wire headphones is way better than using my Bluetooth headphones.
But
I was going to say, when I look out my window, I'm surrounded by everything all the time.
Right. There's Wi-Fi all over the place. And wireless. I mean, the convenience of wireless, it just dominates the electronic world. That's actually can be harder than trying to protect yourself from other types of pollutants. There may be some things that make you less sensitive. Mast cells are also this was a recent study, mast cells are very sensitive to the microbes in your gut. And these researchers basically fed prebiotic fibers to animals and to humans. And they looked at what that did to the mast cells in their tissues. And eating these prebiotics as part of their diet altered the composition of the gut microbiome and also the output of, there were beneficial fermentation products, short chain fatty acids like butyrate and valerate that were absorbed, and that when they get to the mast cells, quiet them down. So you've got these two different influences. You've got EMFs kind of stimulating the mast cells. You've got beneficial short chain fatty acids from a healthy microbiome in your gut calming down the mast cells. Which is going to win? Well, it's, as they say, you've got two dogs fighting each other. The one that's going to win is the one that you feed. Then we get to the pandemic.
Yeah.
COVID-19. I have definitely seen the impact of COVID-19 on allergy to be one that increases the development of allergy and the aggravation of pre-existing allergies, because of what it's doing to the immune system, and also what it's doing to the gut microbiome. Because this has been a lot of my work and attention over the past 4 years, has been trying to understand this illness, and especially the problem of long COVID. There are changes in the microbes in your gut when you get COVID-19. If those changes are reversed, your chances of developing post-COVID complications goes down. If they continue, you have an increased risk of long COVID. And some of those changes involve the loss of these beneficial short-chain fatty acids that are normally calming down mast cells. So we see a lot of mast cell activation after COVID. And sometimes it'll happen after a very mild infection. So
and we're all feeding the wrong side, the wrong dog in the battle, because we're only always increasing the pollution that we're exposed to, like when the
Right.
EMF stuff for the mast cells that you're talking about, so that we're pretty much exposed and weak. When I'm attacked with this COVID virus, then I'm basically decreasing my chances of recovering from it.
Yeah, I would say we probably are. There's a lot that has to be worked out. What has been established is that air pollution increases the severity of COVID, of acute COVID, in people who get it.
Yeah.
And because air pollution has so many different effects on the body. Oh, and then we'll get to the next frontier, plastic. And that's something that I'm really looking at now. Microplastics and nanoplastics are everywhere. I mean, they are fresh fallen snow in Antarctica has microplastics in it. Archaeological strata that are 200 years, 300 years old, before there was ever plastics on the planet. They're contaminated with microplastics now. Birds in the Arctic have them in their tissues. They're in breast milk, in newborn babies. When you expose animals to them, they wind up in their brains. The exposure to microplastics, that is the levels in tissues, are associated with allergies, asthma associated with airborne microplastics. And then of course we've got global warming, which is changing growth patterns, increasing pollen counts. The microplastics are contributing to the global warming because they trap greenhouse gases. So we're really on, we're kind of on a downhill spiral.
Down
this thing
here,
is
and I feel like I'm
snowballing.
attacked from all fronts.
Yeah. And we've created this situation. We should be able to reverse it, but it really will take, it's going to take a lot of commitment and courage and a willingness and ability to go against two very strong forces. One are the economic interests that are profiting from this. They didn't necessarily know that they were going to be creating the problems they're creating, but their products, which have all changed the world in many positive ways, have also created all of these problems, and they have a huge economic incentive not to move away from them.
Yeah.
And then there's the convenience of them, because, I mean, how do you live a life without plastic or EMFs and function in today's society?
Yeah.
Even if you can control outdoor air pollution, and you can, and the food that you eat, and you can eat all organic food, and you can live in a pristine house, you know, how do you handle these other factors? So,
so yeah, but is it you think reversible on a grand, you know, macro level?
It's reversible if we want, if it's going to take will on our part, that is understanding, will, and courage to do it. We can do it. I mean, we created it. We can turn it back. Will we? Does the strength, you know, I mean, exist?
Yeah.
The spiritual strength.
Yeah, but do we need more people? Do we need more people to suffer from, you know, symptoms that are caused by all these effects in order for us to have enough of a will? Because, you know, if you came to me a few years ago and spoke to me about allergies, I wouldn't be so interested, because I didn't think I was affected by allergies until I am. And then until I start investigating. And, you know, when you see a friend or, you know, a son or a daughter of yours affected by these things, then everyone's maybe antennas are.
Well, yeah, there has to be a lot of pain, I think. Yeah. But even so, I mean, look at all the pain that's being caused by climate change and how hard it is to get traction, reversing it.
Yeah, but also because it's not something that everyone feels personally or are aware of that they're feeling personally.
Yeah, right. That's true. So, I mean, I do think that the will be there. It's going to take a lot of education and understanding.
Yeah,
that is, why are so many people sick, and what can be done about it. But that is the background. That's what if you want to really take a global view of allergy, that is what has created the situation that we're in. Now, on an individual basis, you know, you start out, you're a person, you have problems. Maybe you know those problems are allergic. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just know that you get tired. I remember when I first started getting into this, I had taught for a few years after finishing my training. Decided a medical school is not the place where the real truths are going to come, are going to emerge.
Yeah, so why do you say that?
Well, because medical schools, like all institutions, they're divided into silos. Now, there's some great research going on, but, you know, researchers become committed to their particular work that they're doing, their particular concept that they're promoting, and they also have a relatively narrow focus. And it just seemed to me that there was a much more fundamental understanding of why people were getting sick that was not really going to get the recognition or the attention that it needed in a medical school. So I left. I stopped teaching. This was 45 years ago.
Yeah. Where were you teaching?
I was teaching at Stony Brook, New York, at a new medical school. Before that, I had taught at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and I had trained at New York University and Bellevue Hospital.
Did you enjoy teaching though?
Yeah, but it was actually very frustrating because there were all sorts of guidelines and rules I had to follow, and what I recognized about myself is I don't actually like following other people's rules and guidelines. I want to discover what I think is important and work it out for myself. So I went into a kind of rural medicine practice for a few years to get a reset, try to figure out like why, in a stable community that doesn't have all the problems of an urban area, like what's making people sick and healthy. And it was a very interesting kind of experience, because what I realized is that if you called people that you hadn't seen in a while just to find out how they're doing, you could not predict who would be doing well and who wouldn't be doing well from what happened at their last appointment with you in the office. And so I just started looking into factors that were responsible for this. And I looked at nutrition, environment, social interactions. There were a whole lot of things that were, what I discovered was that each of these areas had a tremendous amount of science behind it. It just hadn't crossed over into the practice of medicine. It was like you had two totally different worlds. You had worlds of scientists who were studying the impact of behavior, environment, nutrition on health. And then you had medical education, which still does not adequately really bring those other fields into its teaching and its practice.
Yeah.
And so I had a patient who came into me and said, Doc, is it possible that every time I eat wheat, I could get tired? So I said, well, you tell me. I mean, it's happening to you. And she said, yeah, every time I eat wheat, I feel like I'm going to pass out. So I said, yeah, I guess it is possible. It's happening to you. Let's figure out, what this means. So I started, and also I had this experience where I would put patients on what I thought was a healthy diet. And some of them would feel really terrible. And so I realized that there is not one healthy diet for everybody. And that there's a lot of individuality in how people respond to what we'll call lifestyle influences, let alone how they respond to drugs. And I had to really factor that in to the way that I was practicing. And so I set about trying to understand the quirkiness of individual responses. And that kind of set me going down this path, and I continue to learn new things every day.
And I'm assuming that once you started going down that path, you started, I'm using this term loosely, but fixing people slightly and seeing that these adjustments and, treating people as individuals have beneficial consequences to those individuals.
So two things happened. One was that I realized that my efficacy as a physician went way up. That is, there were a lot of people who, if based on what I had been trained with, I really wouldn't be able to help. And now I was able to start helping them and making some progress. It worked best if I was able to develop a kind of a working relationship with the patient, in which we were partners and the person wanted to be proactive. One of the problems I ran into in the small town I had been in was someone would come in to see me and they would say, well, they would have these certain problems. And I would say, well, look, there are two ways we can approach this. I can give you a prescription for drugs, or you can make some changes in your diet and in your lifestyle. Everybody would say, oh, I want to do it the natural way, doc. But when I saw them a month later, they hadn't done anything. And so I realized that there was way more involved than just figuring out problems. People had to get proactively involved. And that related to motivation, it related to their social interactions. I actually took a year off and did a fellowship in behavioral medicine to try and see if I could figure out how to do this better. And I realized that nobody had really figured out how you motivate people. I mean, people get motivated by being sick sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
They're just a lot of variabilities there.
Yeah. And it's also like there's so many things that I can say this even about myself that, one would say, if you do X, it will help you, but you just don't do X.
Right. That's just being human. I mean,
human,
and if you do things, let's say you're feeling really sick, and so you realize, oh, I've got to change my diet in a drastic way, and then I'm better. And I've seen this happen over and over again. Start feeling better, and it's like, well, okay, I don't have to be so careful anymore, and you may be able to get away with it for a while, but then there's this cumulative effect; it builds up. So it's just it's a lifelong process, and it's a process that works best if the person internalizes it. Like, one of my favorite experiences as a physician is that someone will come in that I haven't seen for several years, and I'll say, how are you doing? And they'll say, well, a couple of years ago, I started to get sick, and I was getting all these symptoms back. And I was going to call you, but then I thought, well, what would Galland tell me if I called? And so I knew what you would tell me, and so I did it myself, and I got better. I love hearing that story, because that is really what I want to be able to do for people, is to help them figure out how they can better control their health. I mean, I'm a consultant, I'm a guide. I have experience and, professional experience and knowledge, but it's really the individual who is carrying this process forward.
Yeah. Because it's not only the actions that us as individuals take on a daily basis if we want to be partners in this journey to healing ourselves, but it's also how much intention are you putting behind it? Like, literally on a day, right from the hours that we sleep to how we breathe to, what AirPods we use or whatever. So it's like it's a 24/7 journey. So even for me, who I see myself as someone who works on their discipline and works out every day and is very straight in that way. Just doing the 3-day power wash that you recommended in your book was an extreme difficulty for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's extreme difficulty, and just the commitment of 3 full days of disconnecting from my patterns of foods, of things, the way I like to eat and the way that I feel satisfied with myself, was really difficult, like fighting an addiction. And there was something in there that you mentioned in the book, which a concept that I thought was fascinating, and I'd love to ask you about it, is being addicted to a way, like us being addicted to these allergic reactions within us.
Well, an allergic reaction creates, there are all these chemicals that are released as part of the allergic reaction and your body's response to the allergic reaction and your body's attempt to calm it down or control it. The adrenal glands really kick in. So there's adrenaline, there's cortisone. Now, those are very addictive substances. And I've seen true withdrawal reactions from when people went on a fast, for example. And it can take 3 days or so. I remember when I was first starting out, and I actually, and in those days you could do things like that. I put a patient in a hospital and had her fast because she couldn't do it at home. And on the 3rd day of the fast, she experienced such dramatic pain all over her body. This was a person who'd been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I had to give her morphine to control the pain. Yeah. The next day, all her arthritis was gone. So there was this withdrawal and then a sudden clearing. The problem then became, okay, how do How do you do this when someone is at home and they return home? And how do you figure out what foods are part of this if you start out with a fast? Um, and it also can be quite changeable. I had a patient who was getting weird episodes where the salivary glands would swell up and become painful, and she'd get sores in her mouth. And she would go to an emergency room, and they'd say, well, maybe you have a virus, except it kept happening over and over again.
Yeah.
So I figured out that it was the result of an allergy to nightshade vegetables. Potatoes, tomatoes, peppers were capable of doing this. And if she avoided nightshade, she didn't have this anymore. And then something very interesting happened, because she had a very high cholesterol, and she had a family history of heart disease.
Yeah.
So, and she didn't want to go on drugs. So I said, okay, you're going to have to do this with diet. You're going to have to make a really dramatic change in your diet. We'd identified the foods that you were allergic to, and you've avoided them. But now you're going to have to go way beyond that if you really want to bring down your risk of heart attacks and bring down your cholesterol. And so she went on a total vegan diet. After about 6 months of doing that, maybe a year, her allergy to nightshades started to go away. And I think that's the result of the change in the gut microbiome, from changing from an omnivore diet to a total vegan diet.
Yeah.
And that's not going to work for everybody, but it will work for some people.
But that's interesting, because then it turns it into, like, even thinking about myself, and it's not just changing your diet and lifestyle to heal your symptoms. You actually could solve potentially the core problem and then kind of go back to eating nightshade vegetables.
Yeah, that may happen. That can happen. And I think eventually it will. I started getting interested in the impact of gut microbes, probably over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I recognized that there definitely was an effect. And
it's getting very popular the last few years, right? The podcasts, the books, and everything. Yeah.
Right. I mean, for a long time, if patients of mine went to see a specialist, they would say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's long." But actually, that's happened with a lot of things. I had really gotten interested in the role of essential fats, omega-3s, omega-6s, that ratio and that balance. It was also it was even 45 years ago, I started to realize that this can have a really profound influence on health. It started to get some attention maybe in the 1990s. The gut microbiome stuff started to get attention maybe 15 to 20 years ago. It started when researchers reported that if you wiped out the microbiome of an animal, that animal would not get obese, no matter how much you fed it. And so it was the obesity connection really was what pulled it into the mainstream. And now it's really become clear that the body's microbiome has a huge impact on all aspects of immune function and metabolic function throughout the body. And for the most part, it's the microbes in the gut, because that's where 98% of them are, 99%. But it can be the microbes on the skin or in the respiratory tract or the genital area as well.
Do we need to define, like, also change our, the common person, the average person's definition of what an allergy is? Because, I think that even me, I didn't even consider, filling out a form, do you have allergies? No. Immediately no, because I never ate a peanut and swelled up. Or I never had something obvious on my skin from eating something. Or taking a medication. So I thought that I did not have any allergies. But then also, like, reading your book, then I correct me here if I misinterpreted, but even things like asthma, eczema, do those fall under the umbrella of what an allergy is?
Yeah, most people with asthma or eczema have allergies. there's an allergic basis for it. When the term allergy was first coined about 1910 or something like that, the meaning of it was altered reactivity. It was, now over time, it became clear.
Was it in Austria or something?
Yeah, it was in
right?
Austria.
Yeah.
Altered
Yeah,
reactivity.
also. So now you know,
Right.
I really read your book.
Yes, you did. Okay. So, and it became clear that a lot of this altered reactivity lay with the immune system. Now, it's still probably the case that when most physicians talk about allergy, they talk about a very specific and narrow type of immune response that's responsible for allergy, which is the production of a group of antibodies called IgE antibodies that are involved in anaphylaxis, in hay fever, peanut allergy, what's defined now as the classic allergies.
Yeah.
However, it's become clear over the last 40 or 50 years that there are other immune responses that can occur and can rightfully be called allergy. And they might involve other types of antibodies or immune cells. And especially with food allergy, you may have a reaction that does not involve IgE, that involves these other mechanisms of allergies. And I kind of go into them in the book. I mean, it's a very complicated area.
Yeah.
And then there are people who have food hypersensitivities that don't directly depend on the immune response. And that maybe shouldn't be called allergy. Maybe it should just be called sensitivity or hypersensitivity. At the end of the day, frankly, what's important is identifying what the triggers are so that you can eliminate them, and then finding ways, and this is something that a person would have a hard time doing on their own. So you need a professional to help. The triggers you may be able to identify on your own. Mm-hmm. But then finding ways to change how sensitive you are to those triggers. And that may involve improving your body's ability to detoxify and respond to toxins. Through diet, through the use of specific supplements, through not overburdening the detoxification system. After all, when I talked about the epidemics of allergy, it's clear that environmental toxins play a significant role. So how does your body respond to those toxins becomes important.
Yeah.
It's not just, well, let's avoid these toxins. Sometimes that's really hard to do. How do we build up a resilience so that these toxins are less problematic to us?
And so you're saying like a key way of, kind of doing what we can control is building up, giving ourselves the chance to deal with these things versus only focusing on eliminating the triggers. How can we build up our defense systems to detoxify these things out of ourselves?
Yeah, and that is one of the aspects of the allergy solution that I try to work on. It's very important to recognize what factors are making you sick, but then also how do you improve your resilience? So oolong tea, which you mentioned, that helps to recruit a group of white blood cells that tone down allergic reactions. And there's been actually a lot of science behind how you do that. It just hasn't crossed over. One of my favorite episodes in this, and I think it's in the book, but I did mention it in the PBS show that I did based on the book, was researchers in San Francisco were aware of the fact that people who own dogs are less likely to have allergies than people who don't, provided that your exposure to the dogs starts in early childhood or infancy, and that your dog is allowed to run around outdoors.
Mm-hmm.
Indoor dogs don't do it. It takes outdoor dogs to do it. And so they did an experiment where they collected the dust from homes of people who had pets and no allergies. And they collected the dust from the homes of people who had allergies and no pets. And they fed that dust to mice. And then they attempted to make the mice allergic to something.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that the mice who were fed the dog dust were resistant to getting allergies compared to the mice who had been fed the dust from homes where people did not have dogs. And then they looked for, okay, so what's the change in these mice? And they found one particular species of bacteria in the stool of these mice that seemed to be the difference. And when they isolated it and fed it to other mice, they could prevent allergic sensitization in those mice. So, I mean, this is a very complex, interactive web.
Yeah. So stuff like that, what takes for it to cross over to the medicinal world?
It takes a place like Mayo Clinic or Harvard to start promoting it. One of the things that I had observed, and this is, was that there were a lot of people that I was seeing with chronic sinusitis in whom an allergy to yeast seemed to be a major factor. Now, I mean, my colleagues and I were making that observation, and we also found that the yeast was living in their bodies. So if you used antifungals, if you used diet and antifungals and probiotics, you could really help them overcome this. And then about, 20, 25 years ago, a researcher at Mayo Clinic, he looked at it a little bit differently, but he basically came to the same kind of conclusion. And that was in the New York Times. And all of a sudden, this concept of allergic fungal sinusitis, that went from being some quack theory that, to a pretty mainstream concept.
So it's so interesting, and also because a lot of things, and you must see this, and it might even annoy you to a degree, but things that you were looking at 45 years ago, as you mentioned, are suddenly becoming accepted by my millennial generation and promoted and trending.
It's not annoying. It's a source of humor and satisfaction. I mean, sometimes I'll sit down and I'll check off all of the different things that had seemed to me, oh, this should be important. And then, I would discover something somewhere. It may be from some person who had looked at this, and I would think, this makes sense. This may be important. Let's explore it. Let's see how much it helps patients. And the microbiome stuff was a big part of it, and something that has been associated with me in certain circles for a long time. But there was the importance of magnesium, trace minerals, omega-3 fats, and essential fatty acids in general. Those are things that back in the 1980s, I discovered to be important. This whole concept of methylation, which is very big in certain circles now. We were working on that in 1984.
Yeah.
So it just tells me that if you have an open mind and you try to be practical and look at what makes sense, that you can really get to important truths that way.
I would like to talk about injections when it comes to allergies, because I'll just reveal a little bit about my story with allergies. I've suffered from eczema since I can remember myself, but I never thought about, until 2 years ago, never even thought about trying to heal it because no one guided me in that direction. No doctor or dermatologist that I've seen ever guided me in that, a healing mindset around eczema. But what did get me into a healing mindset was when I started facing allergies reactions around the springtime, because my eczema problems were always manageable, always. And I know people have it in extreme, horrible ways. I never did, thank God. But the allergies were debilitating. When I had an allergic reaction for a couple weeks, it's a couple weeks of being unable to focus, a couple weeks of being depressed, a couple weeks of being angry. So that's what got me to really digging as deep as I can, at that point, into trying to understand how I can heal this. And I think that a lot of us out there just, don't even think of these things as something that's even worth attempting to heal. So where do you see how are people supposed to know almost that these things that they're experiencing are, at least worthy of trying to heal, because we don't have to just live with them. And if, no one's going to knock on our door to try and help us if we're having these issues, we have to kind of seek it ourselves.
Well, look, a lot of that depends on how much pain and discomfort is this causing you? How much does it interfere with your quality of life? And the decision, because reversing these problems will take work.
Yeah.
And the decision is a very individual one. How much of my energy and resources do I want to put into correcting this problem, as opposed to figuring out how to live with it? And I don't attempt to make that decision for anybody. It's up to them. And my approach to it is pretty non-judgmental.
Yeah.
I'm here to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. But the decision, the goal is yours. I might have my own goals for you, but that's because I tend to be a perfectionist. But it's your goals for yourself that really matter.
Yeah, and on that, with my journey with these things with allergies, so I've also with my diet, I feel like I've been very intentional in terms of what I eat and how I eat, but looking at it through the lens of efficiency, focus, energy. That was my mindset. So even reading your book, there was a high emphasis there on I wrote it down, folates of like beans and peas and lentils, and I realized that I basically eliminated folates from my diet for years and years and years, following different things like the paleo or the keto, or things that really did boost my focus and energy. So I kind of really enjoyed them. But what I did realize that I haven't eaten lentils or peas or beans in years. But then you keep repeating in the book that this is like almost a foundational part of building resilience within your body.
Dietary fiber is pretty essential for the healthy functioning of the gut and the microbiome. And then the other thing that's really important, that's hard to get from a supplement. I mean, you can take supplements of folate or B vitamins if you need to.
Yeah.
There's a wide range of polyphenols in food that have important effects on immune function, on metabolism, on neurotransmitters, on the gut microbiome. And it's hard to really optimize that from pills. I mean, you really have to get down to basics.
Yeah, and so, but also that, because in terms of also product integrity around all these different pills, like it's like, okay, so if I'm looking for folate pills, The options are endless, and the reviews are endless, and everything has positive and negative reviews. And so is like the smart thing to do when it comes to those things, and when they do come in the form of, lentils, peas, beans, to just include those on your daily basis diet?
Yes, assuming that you tolerate them. So, I mean, one of the fundamental premises of the allergy solution is that everybody's different. Everyone is unique. And so there's not a formula that is, this is what's going to fix your problems. There are some people who will, and there are two aspects of nutrition that I think, maybe there are three. Yeah. So there's specific food intolerance or specific food allergy. It's like, if you have you have to avoid these.
Like peanuts, what we know.
Peanuts,
yeah.
Gluten, something like that. Then there's the influence of the whole dietary pattern. That is, there's some people who do better on a paleo type pattern or a keto pattern or a vegan pattern. Each of these can have unique effects on the body. And there's some people for whom it doesn't matter, this pattern, that pattern, as long as it's relatively healthy. And then there is the impact of diet on the microbes in your gut and how that impacts the function of your body, I guess. And then there's a fourth aspect, which is just nutritional adequacy. Are you getting the vitamins, minerals, fiber, polyphenols? I will leave out fiber because that's mostly feeding the gut microbiome. But are you getting the amino acids, the vitamins, the minerals, the essential nutrients that your body needs from food? So all four of those components need to be thought about.
When someone's trying to detect if they have some intolerance toward a specific food, or on the other side, like even meat, making sure I'm eating beans and lentils on a daily basis to see if that does help me in any way. How long should one roughly stick to something to see if it has a positive, negative effect on them?
Okay, well, if we're talking about specific food intolerance, it can take anywhere from 2 or 3 days to 2 or 3 weeks. If we're talking about a dietary pattern, that's going to be anywhere from a week to probably 2 months to see a change.
And to see if it's something that's helping you or you're staying the same.
Yeah,
irrelevant.
Right. If we take one aspect of this, which is not allergic, is in people with arthritis, inflammatory arthritis, the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6 fats in the diet is important. The omega-3s are found in leafy green vegetables, certain seed oils like flaxseed and chia seeds, and hemp seed, and in fish, oily cold water fish. That are getting it from eating plankton, basically. So that's their leafy green vegetable. And then the omega-6s are found in things like meat and poultry and eggs and dairy products, and in a number of seeds and seed oils. So getting that balance right, it may take 12 weeks before you see an impact on arthritis, for example.
Very, very interesting. Asthma, eczema, those are things that I could say this about myself, but also many people around me that I know that suffer from asthma and eczema. Something that you're taught from a young age to learn to live with and to simply just kind of deal with it and manage it. Is there more hope out there for individuals who are suffering from these things?
Yeah, right. So let me just say, self-management is what living is all about. That is, once you becoming an adult is learning how to manage yourself and to learning how to manage all the different components of your life, which may include your allergies, your asthma, your eczema. So I basically encourage an attitude of self-management. Now, so if we take a problem like eczema or asthma, you can manage that better or worse. You have to decide how far do you want to go. You can manage it with drugs. I mean, because there are a lot of one of the things that the pharmaceutical industry is doing is they keep coming up with better, smarter drugs.
Yeah.
You see them advertised on television.
Yeah, but again, I have to interject. Like the drugs are, and I always say this, are like the different creams and ointments that you put on are amazing because a lot of them do work temporarily. So I've been using them for 30 years,
right?
But I'm always going back to step number one.
And every drug has the potential for side effects because most of the drugs that are used are drugs that work by blocking some function that's gotten out of control. And you can tell that by the names of the drug categories, which blocker, inhibitor, anti, so these are all things that are trying to calm down hyperactive functions. But I mean, none of these functions are there to make you sick. They're there to protect you. And so merely suppressing them, not an ideal approach. Sometimes it's the only thing you can do where you need to do it just so that you're able to function and live comfortably. But as a long-term strategy for life, it's not my favorite.
But there are things out there. So like if you do have asthma, then and you do have eczema, but so there's things out there that are causing this issue in your body.
Most eczema, especially if it starts in childhood, probably 70% involves food allergy. There's definitely a significant impact of gut microbes, including those that you're born with, on the development of eczema. And this has all been studied. And we talked about omega-3 fats and omega-6 fats. There's a significant impact of that balance.
So I've had childhood eczema. So there's a 70% chance that it came from, let's say, food allergies. But if I kept, even knowing that I have eczema, in my entire life for 30 years, I've been eating the same types of food without any consideration that what I'm eating may affect my eczema. If I change today, would it take me longer to kind of reverse that microbiome effect because I've cemented it for 30 years into my system?
Yeah, well, I would say the younger you are, the greater plasticity there is in your system. And so the more likely you are to be able to affect a rapid change that's going to be sustained. On the other hand, if problems start when you're young, they may also be stronger. That is, they may be rooted in a more profound imbalance in your system, which is one of the reasons I think it tends to be very individual.
I want to ask you, I think I saw on your Wikipedia page that you were born in India?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
Well, it was World War II. My parents were refugees. They met there.
Wow. And how long did you live in India?
Immigrated to the U.S. when I was about 4 years old.
Okay. Have you been back?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You said your focus now is on long COVID. What is going on in this, post-COVID world? Because the long COVID is things that you hear from your aunt or you see on Facebook something, but it's almost like there's that feeling towards it that why they're keeping that term around COVID. We just want to move on from it.
Well, we're not going to move on from it. I mean, this is a virus that is continuing, and it's not as if the likelihood of your getting a prolonged problem from it has gone down. The SARS-CoV-2 virus that is the causative factor in this pandemic can produce many, many different changes in your body once you're infected. And even the vaccines themselves can do that
because
independently of the infection.
they are injecting that
Because of this,
bit of the
because of
virus
what the
inside.
spike protein does. I mean, part of what the virus does is due to the spike protein itself. Part of it is due to other proteins that the virus contains. And on my website, I have a document called Long COVID Prevention and Treatment. And I developed about a year and a half ago, looking at all the research, a concept that I call the web of long COVID. And it has about 10 different factors. There might actually be more, but the best picture of a spider web that I could find on Google permitted, had 8 strands going out, and we modified it a little. These are all changes that are made in your body when you get COVID. They occur as a result of the infection, and they're all interconnected to one another. And it may be possible to totally restore everything to the way it was before you got infected, or it never goes back to being the way it was before, but to a place where there's stability and balance. But there are a lot of people in whom that doesn't happen. And there are many reasons why that doesn't happen. And so what I am trying to do is to figure out in each individual case, how do you understand what the factors are that need to be addressed to allow this person to restore what we'll call homeostasis, normal balanced functioning.
Is it something that long COVID, is it prominent? Is it a pandemic of itself out there?
Oh yeah. It's the long-term, the major public health effects of this pandemic that we've been through is going to be the long COVID, which can impact people for years after they get sick. A recent study found that the immune disturbances seem to, for many people, will last for 2 years and then correct themselves. But there are other people in whom 2 years keeps going at beyond 2 years. And so my goal is to figure out, how do we speed up the healing process? How do we prevent people who get COVID from getting the prolonged problems? And then how do we help people restore normal function as quickly as possible?
Is this also like allergy is something that we see more prominent in cities and industrial areas versus the rural country areas?
Probably, but that hasn't been looked at systematically.
No.
And partly because the healthcare that's available in rural areas is not the same. So you may get an underreporting. It's a little hard to know. We do know that acute COVID is much worse among people who are exposed to air pollution.
I see. Because also that with COVID, one of the ways that we kind of judge how severe or impactful COVID was for us as individuals on an individual case is the comparison to the flu or to the cold and how hard did it hit you. But we don't look at the, inside the body lasting effects that it might have changed or, created something inside you.
Right. There are a lot of people who have a fairly mild infection when they get COVID, who then go on to subsequently develop pretty severe long COVID. It may be delayed. It may take some other event happening, another type of infection. And there's a lot to be worked out in terms of, we understand a good deal about the mechanisms. It's finding the treatments where I think the main challenge lies.
I have 2 more questions for you. One is about if you've had any experience with yourself, your patients, when it comes to the practice of meditation and tackling chronic illnesses and diseases?
Meditation definitely improves immune function, can really calm the nervous system. There are many different meditative practices, and I think it's an important tool as part of a whole number of approaches that people can use. And if we deal with the psycho, the mind body effects, above and in addition to meditation, there is the way that you think about things. I've seen people get some really profound benefits from cognitive therapies in which they learn to reinterpret the threats and calm down the stress level in their body by using their mind to understand, oh, this is my automatic response to a threat. I don't have to respond that way.
I think also, it's one of the things, besides eating sweet potatoes and lentils, one of the things your book taught me or helped me with was like relax. A lot of people have these things. A lot of people have it worse than you. And a lot of people that have it worse than you have been able to manage and cure it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I mean, one of the worst aspects of this pandemic, for example, was
COVID,
the fear,
COVID
the
or allergies. Yeah.
Well, probably both, but specifically the COVID pandemic was the fear that went with it.
Yeah.
And the way the media aggravated that, like long COVID. Oh, that's a mysterious disease. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
That's not really true. We know a lot about it.
Yeah.
And we can, we are rational human beings. Okay. We can use.
Are we?
Yeah, we are actually.
Yeah.
We are. And if we understand the basis if we understand the basis of human rationality, we can use our skills to solve problems. Okay, this is so that we can improve things for everybody.
Excellent. My last question to you is one that I throw at every single one of my guests. Is there something that, you've been doing this for decades now, is there something that you have fundamentally changed your mind on, where you used to think one way, whether it was 2 weeks ago or a few decades ago, that you have changed your mind on and you have taken a new approach? Because, and again, it's just it's a way to encourage our practitioners out there to consider things that they're sure are correct and the only way, to maybe not being that way. And you must have seen in your journey, with all the things areas that you've studied that might have seen out there in the past and are now becoming popular, how like a domino effect, so many practitioners who thought X are starting to consider maybe Y.
Right. Well, I'm always changing my mind. That is, it's just a process of learning. Most of the time, it's not dramatic; it's gradual. Perhaps one of the major things of the type you're talking about is, I had started out when I was doing this behavioral medicine fellowship and looking at chronic illness. I had started out thinking that the way that a lot of the chronically ill people that I would be seeing, really the problem lay with their social interactions and their mindsets, and that if we could change that they would get better. And that certainly is true for some people. But I started working at a place in New Haven, Connecticut called the Gazelle Institute of Human Development. and it was exclusively devoted to people with those kinds of chronic problems. And I was amazed to see how many people were stuck with chronic complex illness who had great social support, terrific family structures, very proactive attitudes. And I realized this is not about psychology. They're doing everything right, and yet they're still stuck. This is about understanding the biological underpinnings of their illness. And that was a major, it was unexpected. I had not expected that.
So,
We're talking about 1982. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, but not expecting it from, because you came to the place, you arrived at a place where you thought that everything is tied to these social and psychological
I
behaviors.
started out thinking that if we can really work out all these psychosocial issues, that all sorts of people with chronic illness would get better. And I realized that that was not the fulcrum that was needed for these patients. They actually, these people were not sick because of dysfunctional families. They were sick because of problems that medicine was not equipped to understand.
We are complicated,
Yes.
us human beings, which makes it fun and exciting. And as you said, you're always learning, progressing, exploring. So thank you for writing that book, and thank you for calming me down. And hopefully I can, report positive effects, and kind of do my best to stay on this journey of figuring it out and trying to heal.
Okay. Yes.
And spread the word amongst others, because again, I don't think I'm special in any way. I think that just like me, many people with conditions like eczema and asthma and allergies to certain things have accepted that that's their identity and part of who they are and what they are, and they do not take daily actions and choices that they make, that they don't tie any connection to those lifestyle to what their body is experiencing on a daily
That's
basis.
the reason I wrote the allergy solution, so that I could help people make those connections. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about some of my observations.
Fantastic. So Dr. Leo Galland, thank you very, very much.
Okay.
And this summarizes our episode for today.
Okay.
So I thank you for being here again. Super helpful, super influential. And I hope that we keep discovering and tackling these things together, so that we can find an allergy solution eventually. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Okay, good to see you.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.